now available in paperback and e-readers. Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. The goddess next door takes on the threat of a deadly digital diva driven to destroy the world in this action-packed, all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess featuring a bonus pin-up and the other 2 books in the Cyber Goddess saga at online bookstores everywhere today. I have a critical question for all of those so-called SJW comic pros. Who are you trying to sell to? Because oftentimes your SJW comic pros say that they're trying to represent audiences at the comic shop. Unfortunately, many of those audiences they're trying to so-called represent usually don't show up at the comic shop to pick up the comics that they are trying to offer to those audiences. And from a business perspective, that really is not a smart thing to do, because when you're going out here creating product for an audience that isn't there, what you're doing is costing yourself a lot of money, and you're going to wind up losing in the end. Now, your so-called SJW comic pros say that they want to go out here and represent underrepresented groups with their comics, and they believe that if they go out here and make these books will go out here and be able to show how they're being more inclusive as related to these underrepresented groups. Unfortunately, this has not really led to any sort of impact on sales. Now, you'll get a lot of controversy as related to characters like your Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, or your Black Batmans, or any of your other, what I call hand-me-down characters. Yes, these books will get a lot of press as related to the comic book community, and these articles on places like CBR.com and Bleeding Cool will get a lot of hits, and you'll get a lot of people talking on social media about these diversity characters. However, when it's time to actually print the tangible books and try to sell the tangible books, many of these so-called groups that your SJW comic pros come out here and say that they're trying to represent oftentimes do not show up at the comic book store to come pick these books up. And that is reflected in the Comic-Con sales numbers, where we can see that yes, many comic book stores will order these books that feature your so-called represented groups, but what will happen is they won't be able to generate the sales to justify their existence. And in publishing, you have to be able to generate sales in order to justify keeping a book in print. So this is where the dilemma lies as related to your efforts at these comic companies for so-called representation. And the problem is that many of these comic book creators, these SJW comic creators as they're called, they oftentimes talk about representing groups. Unfortunately, the way they represent groups does not create a product that appeals to the customer, that gives them incentive to go out here and show up to buy the book. Now, the big problem I see with many of these so-called SJW comic pros, as they're called, is that many of them really approach the whole concept of diversity and inclusion from an extremely paternalistic view. Now, instead of giving us diversity of thought as related to a race or a culture or an ethnic group, what we get is a paternalistic view, and this paternalistic view breathes brand new life into old stereotypes. Now, your editorial at these comic book companies, they'll go out here and hire like these black bootlegs like a Ta-Nehisi Coates, and they'll say that he's going to represent black culture in his stories. Unfortunately, what you get from a black bootlick is not an authentic story that gives us the richness and diversity of black culture, for example. All they give you are stereotypes that make many of the social justice types, who are mostly leftists, feel comfortable about their smooth world regarding the black experience. So what you get from a Ta-Nehisi Coates or another type of black bootlick is not a story that gives us an organic picture of black culture and the black experience and allows it to integrate into the Marvel Universe. No, what we get are token characters that are representing the stereotypes that make your white leftist social justice types feel comfortable, and that makes for an extremely uncomfortable reading experience for the readers who do go out here and buy these books. And when they buy these books, they have a very disappointing reading experience reading these books. So that's one of the problems with your social justice types as related to their whole campaigns for representation. They don't really go out here and hire the right people to represent the culture that they're trying to write about. And because these people don't really know the culture that they're writing about, yes, they may be very educated in universities like a Ta-Nehisi Coates, but they're not on the ground. They don't do their research. They don't really sit down and talk to people or go out here and connect with people. And because they don't connect with people, what happens is they create a product that comes across as very, very counterfeit. And this product really it comes across as really, again, paternalistic, and it comes across as trying to pander. And as it tries to pander, it tries to be an everything for everyone instead of giving us just a very specific story about a character who is living their life and their experiences and allowing us to relate to them as a person. And that's one of the big reasons why people don't want to come out here and represent, to go out here and buy many of these social justice comics, as they're called, because many of these comics don't really give us an authentic picture of an experience, and they really don't give us a story that flows organically into a place like the Marvel Universe or the DC Universe. Now, in contrast to Ta-Nehisi Coates, we have John Ridley, who was writing Black Panther right now, and his Black Panther flows organically into the Marvel Universe. His Black Panther shows us the complete Wakandan culture, and it also gives us a picture of T'Challa as a character and a person that we can care about. So he's a completely different approach, and this book is one I would go to the comic book store and represent, to go out here and support, because this comic gives you an experience that shows us a hero inside of the Marvel Universe dealing with action and adventure and dealing with the struggles of being a hero, and is not trying to represent a ethnic group or a race, and is not trying to go out here and be an everyman that represents all of the entire black community. No, he's a character who is black, and he's a compelling character with a backstory and a mission that flows organically into the Marvel Universe. So that's why people don't want to represent as related to your social justice books, because they don't really flow organically into the universe that they're in. They come across as really preachy. They come across as only promoting some sort of identity politics, and all they do is give us stereotypes and not human types. And that is one of the reasons why people don't represent for your SJW books, but will go out here and represent for quality books. So when I look at your comic book business, again, a lot of the people in it, they talk about representation, but the whole thing is that they're getting the wrong people to work for them. because if you talk about so-called representation, you need to find somebody who can go out here and knows how to do research, knows how to craft stories, and knows how to give us a story about a character, and that character will take us into a world, and in that world, as we get to know them, we will learn more about a culture and more about their experiences in that culture, and that's what people want. Because I remember when I was writing Spellbound and I was writing the Matilda Crowley character, a lot of people really liked it because I went out here and I did the research to show people the goth subculture, and I wanted to show how a black person comes into the goth subculture. So I spent over 2 to 3 years doing research on the music, doing research on the slang, doing research on the fashions and the art. I wanted it to be where you're going to learn about the goth subculture and the black experience, and I wanted it to be something where you're not going to get a paternalistic view, but an organic flowing into learning about the subculture and the roots of the subculture and Matilda's journey. So I made it mostly about Matilda's journey into the subculture, and it made it to be a very compelling story for a lot of readers. I really don't like what they're doing talking about so-called representation, because the so-called representation reminds me so much of tokenism, because it's basically you just making a character just for the sake of inclusion instead of creating a character that is compelling as a person, a character who has a compelling personality and voice, and is somebody that the audience can care about and connect with. That's somebody who's going to become a popular character because they are their own person, they're telling their own story, and they're not out here trying to be an everyman for an entire group of people, because you cannot have one character representing black people. No, because the black experience is a really broad thing, and there are numerous cultures and subcultures inside of the black community, and you just cannot go out here and say one character is going to represent all of that, because the black culture is far richer than most people even know, because the mainstream media will only give you the hood or the streets, but black culture is far richer than that. And again, that's what is, you cannot just represent it with one character, and that's why this whole narrative of the SJW Comic Pro falls completely apart, because you're trying to represent people as one thing, and all that is stereotyping. And what you're doing when you stereotype is you put people into a small box that makes them only acceptable to your ideas and viewpoints. And that's sadly what you get with many of the so-called SJW comics. They passively talk about diversity and inclusion, but aggressively they breathe brand new life into old stereotypes, and these old stereotypes are the same racist caricatures and ideas that were often presented during the days of eras like Jim Crow in the 20th century, and even old stereotypes that go back to slavery. And this is just me talking from the black experience. There are other cultures that see the same stereotypes presented in many of these books, and this is a major turnoff to all of those groups that they say that they're representing, because many of those groups that they say that they're representing in these articles that they talk about, what happens is many of those groups, like black people, like myself, we get turned off because we can see that this is not something that's organic. We can see that it's pandering, and when you go out here as a publisher and you pander, you are coming from a position of weakness. When you come from a position of weakness, you are showing the world that you're not confident, you don't believe in what you're producing, and this is another reason why many of your what they call SJW books wind up failing, is because many of the creators really don't believe in their product. They don't have a heart as related to their product, and because they don't have a heart as related to their product, they cannot really sell their product, and that's why many of their products wind up dying on store shelves, because there's no real heart behind it. And because they don't represent with their heart, what happens is nobody believes in their products, and that's why these guys get roasted all the time and they get defensive on social media. But the whole thing is, if you come out here, you don't believe in your product, you don't have any heart, and you're trying to represent people you don't believe in, what happens is people don't see you as confident, and they don't trust you as a creator. And that's another reason, as related to the reason why many of these so-called representative books really don't sell. They don't sell because these creators, again, they don't really believe in their product. They want to try to get brownie points and virtue signal by creating these covert contracts with the audience where they say, oh, I represented you, so you should buy my book. But that's extremely dishonest. No, if you really believe in your product, you're not going to try to pander to an audience by trying to say, oh, I did this for you, so you should do for me. No, in an interdependent relationship between a creator and a audience, what we do is we say, hey, I've created a story. I think you'll enjoy it, so why don't you give it a try? And we leave it at that. We just put the product out there, let the customer make their decision, and if the customer likes the product, the customer will come back for more product, and they can trust and know that the product is going to be genuine from the heart. And if it's genuine from the heart, you're going to get quality product every time. It's not about trying to say that, oh, I'm representing this group, I'm hoping that they'll like me and accept me. No, that's coming across, again, as dishonest and weak. And that's what we have a lot of in the comic book business these days. A lot of people who don't have any confidence in themselves, don't have any faith as related to their creativity, and they're hoping to use minorities and black people as gimmicks in an effort to try to generate so-called sales based on representation. But what they represent are a bunch of lies. They're not really representing to the customer a reason to buy the product. They're not really selling themselves, and selling yourself is core to going out here and selling a book. Whenever I go out here and I'm selling a book, like either an ISIS series book like ISIS Legacy, or East-Team Horror of the Hyena Woman, or the upcoming John Haynes at Death's Door, or even a novel like Spellbound, I'm coming from the heart, I'm coming from myself, and I know that I'm not just selling my characters like an Isis or an East-Team or a John Haynes or a Matilda Crowley, I'm also selling myself. And the other problem with many of your so-called SJW comic pros is they don't know how to sell. A lot of them, they think, oh, I'll go out here and represent different groups. But again, you don't believe in the group you're representing. You don't trust the audience. So you attack the audience when they reject you, instead of understanding you didn't take a time to build a relationship with the customer. You have to build a relationship with the customer if you want to sell your comics, and you have to sell them genuine ideas that come from the heart, not something that you're trying to do to try to get brownie points with people in an effort to try to make yourself appear to be this virtuous or this moral person. That's not going to sell to people, because that comes across as you being extremely dishonest. And when you're dishonest, people can see right through that, because they can see right through you. When you're out here and you're selling a book, you're selling, again, yourself. And that is something many of your so-called SJW comic pros don't understand. They don't understand the business of publishing. They don't understand the business of sales. And they don't understand that at the end of the day, you represent yourself. When you're out here on social media, you represent yourself in the pages of your story. You represent yourself when you're out here promoting your work. And the way you carry and conduct yourself, it's a representation of you. And if you want people to represent at the store, you have to represent respect to them. You have to represent courtesy to them. And you have to represent professionalism to them. And people, when they see you representing respect, professionalism, and courtesy, then they're going to have an incentive to buy your books. They want to see you being honest and transparent with them, and that is something that many in the so-called SJW comic pros, they don't really understand. You have to represent being honest and transparent as related to your work, because again, if you don't believe in your work from the heart, you can't ask people to represent you at the comic book store, because if you don't represent honesty to them, then they have no interest in representing at the store to pick up your work. Now, if you want to see me make more comic-related videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to pick up some of my books on the SJS Direct imprint, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, or the John Haynes series, or books in the Smith-Torella trilogy, you'll find those books in paperback and Kindle format on Amazon.com and paperback and Kindle format. And you can if you want to pick up one of my first comic, E-Steam No Good Deed, you can find that on Kindle for 99 cents on Amazon.com right now. That's all I have to say for this video. You comment, rate, subscribe.
Now available on Kindle, E-Steam No Good Deed. The Devil's Diva scares some stick-up kids straight in this action-packed E-Steam series comic. Get E-Steam No Good Deed on Kindle for 99 cents today.